Forgive this blasted handwriting, Doris, but you must attribute the chicken scratch to my dire and dreadful situation, and to the fact that I'm a doctor. Had any of my other memos been written such as this one by my own hand, you'd have seen that, while sloppy, my penmanship under the conditions I found myself in is of far more frantic caliber. Please know that despite this, and despite whatever it is I'm about to scribble, that this is Daniel. This is Dr. Jacobson who is writing this, and that I have not gone mad. Of course, that's entirely what a madman would say, I suppose. But I hope that, given my level of vocabulary here, and our years of both professional and personal confidence in one another, that you might believe me now, because this account is most certainly unbelievable. Before I go back to the beginning, Doris, and explain to you why you must do what I ask of you, as preposterous as it may seem, I must first skip to the end with a request that may be as dire to you as it is for me. That if I do not return to the office today by 5 in the afternoon, or before whenever the sun begins to set, that you must kill me. By your hand or the authorities, but you have to tell them that I mustn't be shot. Impale me. Burn me. Decapitate me. Just don't shoot. Please, God, just don't shoot. And if you or they must shoot, just don't miss and use silver. Should the police need a reason as to why to use deadly force against me, tell them I'm armed and dangerous. Tell them I'm a loon. Hell, show them this godforsaken note. Officer, I will kill people if you don't kill me, you understand? Their blood will be on your hands, got it? There. That ought to do it. Now, Doris, should I go missing, should you never see me again, in my absence, I want you to offer my position as senior dentist to Marcus Maelstrom, my associate. In his place, then, the new intern, Seth, will be his. Tyra will remain as our hygienist, and you, Doris, will promptly give yourself a raise as our secretary, however you see fit, given all this trouble. I entrust you with this, and the deed to the building, should you or Marcus need it, is behind the picture of me smiling sloth in my office. I think that covers everything in the end. Now, on to the beginning, which happened yesterday. As you'll recall, it was November the 1st, one of the busiest times of year in our profession, it seems. Be it due to the impending holiday season, family photos as early as Thanksgiving, or the last-minute usage of insurance benefits before the proverbial calendar folds shut. Most importantly, in the case of this story I'm relaying to you, it was the day following Halloween, when every worrisome mother or helicopter father rings your desk, as I'm sure you're already well aware, to get all of the so-called sugary gunk out of their children's mouths, after letting them be filled with dum-dums, candy corn, peanut butter cups, and every other vehicle for high-fructose corn syrup on the market all in the span of 4 hours. Suffice it to say, Doris, I hate Halloween, but also love it. Professionally, it makes an ugly mess of the otherwise top-notch services we provide to our community. However, personally, and perhaps more so selfishly, it makes all of us a quick buck after an otherwise slow season, following the August back-to-school rush and the homecoming push of mid-September. If that was a lot of superfluous or otherwise rhetorical information, then forgive me. My mind is quicker than my hand can even write this. And I suppose that's because all of it is rather fresh after my little chat with little Robbie Beekman. Do you remember the Beekmans? Surely you must. Perfectly quaint little family of 4. Robert and Karen, Daisy and Robert Jr., whom I was introduced to simply as Robbie. You might recall the Christmas card pinned up in my office. The one sent with the box of a dozen candy canes some 2 years ago. If so, well, that is the Beekman family and their youngest. Little Robert Jr. was here as of yesterday afternoon. Listen, or rather read this carefully now. I want you to go into my office and grab that very card. Take a good look at it, and at that little boy. Look at his face, look into his eyes. You may very well see that face again, but those eyes are long gone. Lost to something downright hellish, if I'm right about this thing. Therefore, this is the part that'll be most difficult for you, as both a grandmother and as a human being, I know. If you see that boy after dusk today, or any day, just as you'd see me, you must kill him. You understand? You must kill the boy, Doris. Don't let him live. And know that it isn't a little boy you're killing at all. It isn't. Know that well. In fact, you'd be doing a damned public service, pardon my French. Even if you don't believe me, which I'm sure you don't, at least humor the man whom you've known for the last decade and who signed every last one of your paychecks. A man you probably assume has gone absolutely batty, and justifiably so. Maybe you think the late hours we spent laboring meticulously about the office have finally gotten to me? Or that maybe my recent divorce from Jane has pushed me over the edge? Know that neither of these is the case. As for the former, well, you've seen me day in and day out. You can attest firsthand to my sanity, my punctuality, my professionalism. For the latter, well, you can call Jane, by all means. You probably know her number by heart. But if not, it's in the Rolodex. And you can ask her to defend my character. Though, yes, admittedly, the separation has been hard on us both. Neither of us has been nasty to the other in any conceivable way. If not for our own sakes, then for the sake of little Vincent. Though I assure you, there's no bad blood between us, even if we hadn't conceived a child together. Children, yes, yes. We must think of the children. Now more than ever. I suppose for their sakes I've wasted far too much time already. All right. Allow me to get on with the story. Robbie Beekman arrived yesterday sometime before 9 in the morning. I was just finishing up with the patient. It must have been Mrs. Lancaster, the woman with the far too white dentures, when Seth informed me that a young boy was waiting in the lobby for me. You must remember that Seth, bless his heart, is still developing those fine-tuned privacy and security skills you've all too well acclimated to over your many years of service. Even so, I cut the young man slack, given the rather bizarre circumstances of the boy's visit. According to Seth, Robbie arrived alone. It's hard enough to spot anyone under the age of 12 in the toy aisle of a department store all by themselves, let alone in a medical office such as ours. So, when I was all finished up with Mrs. Lancaster, I telephoned Seth to let the boy back and then asked him, "Good morning, Robbie. Where are your folks?" I said, and the boy nodded shyly. "At work," the boy said. He said this with a considerable lisp, despite the fact that I had no recollection of performing any wirework inside the boy's mouth. Nor did I refer his parents to any sort of orthodontist who specialized in braces. It then dawned on me, as it should have from the moment I realized you were behind the front desk, Doris, that it was Friday, per the child's statement. Oh, I chuckled, somewhat nervously as I began to grasp the situation. I must admit, Mr. Beekman, there are certainly better ways to play hooky. I'm not playing hooky, the boy said to me. Oh, is that so? Well then, what brings you by, son? At this point, the boy opened his mouth with an accompanying ah, as is often my direction when doing so. There appeared to be something, even at the distance from my desk to the doorway, coating the boy's teeth. Some foreign object, perhaps, or some kind of substance. Something slightly opaque with a light greenish tint. I asked him to step a bit closer. He did, and then explained it to me as I started to figure it out myself. They're vampire teeth, and they're stuck. Stuck? I asked a bit excitedly. The boy nodded with hard swings of his neck to the point where I thought he might harm himself. Well, I thought and glanced at my watch, realizing I didn't have another appointment for a good half hour. Why don't you take a seat and I'll have a closer look? The boy did just as I asked without another lispy word. I grabbed for my spectacles in their usual perching spot upon my desk, and then realized they were dangling from around my neck, bouncing softly on my tie. I slipped them onto my face, grabbed my stool, and scooted up to the child as he settled back beneath the overhanging lamp. I went for its switch, and he stopped me. Dr. Jacobson? Yes, Robert. He swallowed before continuing. I remember that because it was very pronounced. Could you not turn the light on? I chuckled nervously once more. Might be a bit hard to see, son. I know, but it'll hurt my eyes. I grinned, as you once called it my signature warm reassurance, and rolled back on the stool until I hit the edge of my desk with my hip. The shades had been sitting in there for so long that I didn't even need to feel around for them in the drawer. Well, you're in luck, sport, I said in that real way-to-go champ sort of way. Now, I admit these probably aren't what the kids these days call cool, I said, handing him over the black shaded goggles, which, as you know, nearly double as a welding mask. But you strike me as a trendsetter. The boy didn't laugh. They never do. Usually that joke gives the parents a slight chuckle at least, and for a split second, I expected it from over my shoulder. But that day I was without the typical peanut gallery. The boy took the glasses apprehensively, then said, It'll still hurt my face, though. Your face? I clarified. The boy nodded. Had my chair had a back to it, I would have certainly sunk right in. Perhaps the boy had a sunburn, I thought, even though his skin looked fairer than my own, and I only could go outside to fetch the mail. Or maybe he had some kind of disease or hypersensitivity, though I don't recall it from any of our previous appointments. I say all of this to say, Doris, that when confronted with the strange or bizarre, we tend to do everything we can to rationalize it, to explain it away. Otherwise, we must dare to confront a horrible truth about ourselves. That, deep down, we can so easily be swayed to utter madness. Well, I said, folding as one might do in a game of cards. I suppose I can see enough. They are glowing in the dark, the boy said, and he was right. The little chompers inside of his mouth were glowing, albeit only slightly, as cheap plastic toys of the same gimmick often do. I chuckled slightly. Did your cape glow in the dark too? The boy shook his head. Well, I guess even Count Dracula needs a nightlight, huh? The boy's face stretched in confusion. I went as Batman. At the time, the irony went straight over my head. Batman? Robbie nodded and tried not to gag as the saliva must have accumulated in his mouth. I nodded apologetically, switched on the ejector, and sucked out the excess before he nearly gagged again. The child then slurped once, licked the greenish plastic-like coating across his teeth, and thanked me. Afterward, I set the suction device down, retrieved a mouth mirror, and pulled myself once more closer to little Robbie with my glasses now at the tip of my nose. It was sweating despite the cool autumn breeze that glided past the open window. The teeth weren't a part of your costume then? As I asked this, the boy opened his mouth and I gently lowered the mirror into it. Simultaneously, my tie, which hadn't been clipped on account of the x-ray I'd taken of Mrs. Lancaster's osseointegration that morning, dangled just below the boy's chin and began to tickle him. He giggled a little before I hoisted it over my shoulder and resumed the inspection. Uh-huh, he mumbled, the rounded corners of his smile straightening, and shook his head slightly from side to side. Sure enough, the mirror only confirmed my surface-level suspicions. The object appeared to be nothing more than your standard glow-in-the-dark vampire teeth, sold at every 5 and dime from here to Timbuktu. Instinctively, I went for my explorer. So, where are they from? I watched as the boy followed the sharp metal object with wide eyes, never blinking. A house? I nodded and lowered the instrument into his mouth alongside the mirror in my other hand. Okay, whose house? I don't know, he said, sighing that the scary, sharp object was not out of sight and hidden carefully in his mouth. With it, as carefully as I could have under the guidance of this small mirror, I began to lightly prod and pull at the object in an attempt to remove it from the child's teeth and gums. This was a process much harder than initially seemed, despite my having done so with countless retainers over the years. The plastic vampire teeth were seemingly suctioned onto the boy's jaw. In his own words, stuck. When my initial curiosities about the situation were addressed, though not answered, I found myself now more so curious with the boy's reply. That this otherwise seemingly innocent party favor lodged in his mouth was from a household that he didn't know. What do you mean, son? I asked. He was about to answer when I removed both of my tools from his mouth. It said, please take one, so I did. The boy said this in earnest, and immediately my heart bled on behalf of his innocence. Ah, a trick or treat, I then said. Really, I thought, this must have been some kind of trick. I've heard, as I'm sure you have, Doris, of those frightful accounts of tampered candy. Razor blades, poison. I mustn't fill your mind with such images any further, but you get the idea. Never before had I heard of cheap dollar store fangs being such a culprit. Had someone filled them with superglue? God forbid, no, certainly not. Did you have any other treats last night? I continued. I figured the boy had perhaps eaten some sort of chewy, tacky candy, gum or taffy or the like, before fitting the vampire teeth over his own, and subsequently over the sticky residue. Maybe he'd even left them on overnight, crashed from some sort of sugary high and left the concoction to dry. These were, of course, nothing but a series of rapid assumptions on my part. Assumptions that likewise assumed that the Beekmans were neglectful of their youngest at best. Knowing what I knew about their character from our interactions up until that point, this seemed highly unlikely. A couple picky sticks, chocolate bars, and those little pumpkins, Robbie answered. My stomach turned as if settling rotten milk. This confirmed my lingering fear. Someone had done this. And probably not to just little Robbie alone. Did you tell your parents about all of this, Robert? The child immediately shook his head. No, they'd be mad. I nodded. And that's why you came here instead of school? Uh-huh. I nodded again. You took your bike to get here? Yeah. And if I asked you to show me the house where you got these teeth, could you? The boy bobbed his head. How would you get there from here on your bike? Robbie thought about this for a quiet moment. I could hear the wind whistle.
I would go down the street.
This way or that way? I asked, pointing in either direction to my left or right.
That way,
he said, confirming the right.
Then I go left and turn left again at the Widow Park.
I knew where that was. The dog park. It isn't far. Just as the child said, you take a right at 2nd Avenue, a left on Maple, and another left on 13th Street. The park would be difficult to spot this time of year, now doubling as nothing but a flurry of orange and red leaves beside the lake. But otherwise, it's a rather sleepy part of town. That'd bring you to 13th Street, right? The boy shrugged.
I guess.
Then which house is it? He thought again, a bit longer this time than before.
The white one on the left.
With the little porch? Robbie nodded. Just as I feared. The old Schroeder house. That was it, all right. I knew the Schroeders. And maybe you did too, Doris. Nice old couple. Thomas Schroeder was a former client of many years, in fact, and unlike Mrs. Lancaster, had rather naturally colored dentures, probably because the old man was an avid coffee drinker, just like his wife. No one would have ever suspected she'd developed type 2 diabetes, probably because they wrongly assumed that she liked it black like her old man did, as did I. However, I was the first to suspect such a disease, even though I couldn't very well diagnose it myself. Melody had a canker, nothing major. Most folks do. Although typically you'd expect them in a younger mouth like little Robbie's over a woman pushing 75. No. It wasn't the mere presence of the canker sore that concerned me. It was that it hadn't healed in nearly 3 weeks. According to the poor woman who, mind you, had only become my client after such rave reviews from her husband. To make a long story short, which I'm doing an awfully poor job of, I know, Melody Schroeder had to have her right foot amputated on account of poor circulation. The surgery went about as well as it could have, but the house, whose bedroom is on the 2nd story, immediately became problematic. For a good month and a half while the place was up for auction, the Schroeders slept on the sofa upstairs, at least as it was relayed to me by other residents of 13th and Maple. Then, when the auction ended and the house still hadn't sold, they upped and left. Where they went, I can't say, but there's reason to believe they moved in with friends while the realtor continued with home showings. I believe her name was Erica something, but as of a few weeks ago, the for sale sign in front of the home up and vanished, so there's no way for anyone to verify that. Suffice it to say, Doris, that house is vacant, meaning there's no way little Robbie could have gotten anything from it at all. Unless, of course, the boy's lying. Or unless there's squatters inside. You may rightfully ask yourself, though, if that were the case, why on earth would a squatter, who by their very nature, dwelling within a home still in the market, would want to remain as discreet as humanly possible, give out little Halloween trinkets, essentially announcing their presence to an entire neighborhood? Your guess would be as good as mine. Of course, I couldn't outright guess it to the child at the time. Instead, I clarified what he had already told me. You said there were teeth in a bowl on the porch. Uh-huh, he replied, flinging spittle on his chin. I wiped it off with my glove. And a sign read, "Please take one."
White.
Did anyone else?
Yeah, all my friends did.
Good Lord. Did any of them have the same problem?
I don't know, I didn't go to school.
That's right, I said aloud. That's right, and his teacher will be phoning his parents about it any moment. And they'll be worried to death. And then they'll wonder, if the boy was with you, why didn't you call them immediately? Why didn't you call us, Dr. Jacobson? Because what was I supposed to say, Doris? That their child was inflicted with a bad case of sticky vampire teeth, is that what? So, all you need to do is pry them off, I reassured myself. pry them off, and maybe give the boy some anti-cavity toothpaste and send him on his way. So that's what I began to do. I began to pry them off, gently at first. But the more and more I realized my efforts were futile, I started to get aggressive on the jaw, pulling at the dimly glowing teeth with about the same strength I would have had they been a lid on a well-sealed jar. "Ah! Ah!" the boy whimpered. I could see his eyes begin to water. "I'm sorry, Robbie," I said, still wedging my explorer between the boy's teeth and the foreign object. "This will only hurt for a moment. It's almost off," I lied. "Okay," he said. His voice was now shaken. I needed to end this, but I couldn't. The damn thing just wouldn't come off. What's under this thing, grout? I don't even think the towel in my bathroom would hold this much. After a good 2 minutes of tugging and pulling at the boy's expense, I decided to give his mouth a rest as I thought up other ways of unlodging the object from within it. He could tell that I looked nervous, and soon his face began to mirror my own. "Is it gonna come off?" "Yeah, of course," I reassured him. "It's just a bit stuck is all. Nothing I haven't seen a dozen times before, Mr. Beekman." That lie was bigger than the first. And as you know, I never lie to my patients, Doris, especially children. "Let me look again," I told him, and then used my handheld light to inspect around like searching a pitch-black cave with vaguely green columns. Sure enough, aside from the vampire teeth, there was also a considerable buildup between what I could see of some of Robbie's actual teeth just above his gum line. Someone hasn't been flossing, I thought, and then retrieved my instrument again. "Now, Robbie," I said, "I'm going to scrape away some of the buildup between your teeth, okay? That way they'll be nice and free from any obstructions, any gunk, and we can get these silly vampire things off of them." "Will it hurt?" I shook my head with a smile. "Not at all, son." The boy nodded and opened his mouth. My first targets were the left lateral incisor and the left canine, 10 and 11, and the plaque building up between them. So much as I could tell, it was probably just foodstuffs and candy, but it couldn't hurt to clear up anyway. As soon as I started, it was immediately apparent that this was a neglected area of the child's mouth. The gums immediately started to bleed, and I could even make out the softest stains of brown tartar. "You eat a lot of candy, do you, Robert?" The boy shrugged. "Only for Halloween, really, and Christmas, and Easter." I was about to continue when I noticed his face scrunch a little in thought. "And I guess sometimes after soccer practice." I nodded and appreciated the boy's honesty. Children are often the most transparent clients, for better or for worse. "What kind of candy do you have after practice?" "Usually bubble gum, kind of like yours." "Like mine?" I asked. "Yeah, like when you clean my teeth." "Ah, you mean the polish," I said, and the boy nodded. "Usually the paste I use is mint-flavored for my adult patients and bubblegum for the kids." "Mm-hmm. What flavor is this one?" "This what?" "Polish." "No polishing yet, Robbie. Not until I defang you, at least." I watched as the boy's expression tightened and his eyes narrowed. "Then what's the sweet taste?" I aimed the handheld light into the child's mouth and noticed that some of the blood from little Robbie's gums had trickled down onto his tongue. And call me crazy, Doris, but in that moment, a chill shot up my spine as I realized that the boy had begun to salivate because of it. Sure, he might have just had a high blood sugar at the time, but in over 35 years, I've never heard of anyone equating the taste of their own blood with candy. "What's wrong, Dr. Jacobson?" The boy could see that I had probably gone pale white. Nothing at all." I suppose to perhaps behave as casually as I could have given the circumstances, not to cause the child any alarm, I suddenly started to mindlessly pry at the vampire fangs of my explorer like a child picking at their uneaten food with the end of a fork, never minding the fact that it had been a useless endeavor. At least it would have been, had the glowing green teeth not begun to slip off. "Are you okay?" Yes, of course, Robbie, the teeth, I said a bit too excitedly. They're coming off.
Really?
I nodded, my tie dropping to the boy's chest as I did, and traded the handheld light for my mouth mirror, instinctively lowering it beside the Explorer as the cheap, plastic-like choppers began to peel away. It was satisfying, Doris. Oh, so satisfying, let me tell you. I had to tilt the mirror back to get a better look. What had I missed? What had held the loathsome things on in the first place? These questions were never answered, mind you, as a new one had abruptly seized me and my tongue, flushing my cheeks and forehead with immediate warmth and panic. How could I see the ceiling in the mirror? Surely the roof of the child's mouth would have been in the way. Yet somehow it was no longer visible, Doris. I swear to you this. Nothing of little Robbie was visible anymore. The child's reflection was simply missing.
Dr. Jacobson, you don't look so good.
It had just been there, hadn't it? How else had I seen the boy's teeth?
You're all red, sir.
You didn't sleep well last night, Dan. Trick-or-treaters kept you up, didn't they? You're just seeing things. You're just... Ugh. The boy suddenly began to gargle. I looked up from his mouth and watched as his eyes began to roll back into his skull, showing nothing but the milky whites. Robert, what's happening? The boy's mouth began to bubble with saliva, and drool overflowed onto his chin and down his neck. I then watched all too closely. The image forever seared into my mind, now as the child's cheeks began to swell like a baby about to vomit. But instead of vomiting, he spat the blood-covered vampire fangs into my face and opened his jaw hideously like that of a snake. And that's when I saw that little Robbie Beekman had fangs of his own.
Wed,
I heard him grumble over the thumping of my heart.
You're all wed, Dr. Jacobson.
Then I felt the tug, as Robbie gripped the end of my tie with his tiny hand and with great strength pulled me down toward him, his drooling mouth unhinging to a size I never thought would be humanly possible. It wasn't humanly possible. And that's when, for the first time and last time in my adult life, Doris, I slapped a child across the face. Right across the face like you'd see in the movies. Except to my surprise and horror, the boy didn't yell or shout or holler about it, despite the fact that my hand was stinging and surely his cheek must have been too. He merely lay there, stiff as a board, as I stumbled backward towards the door, gripping my metal tools with one jittering hand and fumbling for the cold handle with the other. I then watched as the child slowly sat up, turned his head in my direction, and drooled onto himself. Robert, I'm calling your parents this second, I said, beginning to turn the handle. In hindsight, this was a foolish threat, but the only one I could make in the moment and with any potential consequence to a child of the boy's age. Robbie's eyes rolled forward with a look so intensely penetrating that immediately my head began to throb.
No, you can't tell them,
the child screamed. I can't tell them, I repeated without affect. I still don't know whether or not I had said this of my own accord. I then watched in a paralyzed stupor as little Robbie's eyes rolled back again while he began to approach me. Whether or not he was gliding through the air, I can't seem to remember. But in my mind's eye, it appeared that way. He was advancing at an almost ethereal speed. No, I didn't slap the boy again. As I said, the first time was also my last. Instead, I did something far more effective. Instinctually, as if playing Van Helsing in some old black and white horror show, I raised my instruments into the sign of the cross before me and winced. Little Robbie did too. In fact, he did more than wince. He screeched. It was shrill and painful, and then he brushed past me, pushing open the door and fleeing into the lobby. I heard a handful of shrieks over my shoulder as I got my bearings straight, and then, when I had finally found myself grounded, followed in the boy's direction. But by that time, he was already gone. Seth stood in the open doorway, gripping his frame with both hands and leaning into the hallway. Behind him, the lobby buzzed with murmuring voices. Magazines fluttered on the ground like freshly fallen foliage. and a single chair lay overturned. A small hand suddenly and softly gripped my forearm from behind me. I flinched and spun around on my heel with a gasp. The old woman, whom I immediately recognized as Elma Lutterman, matched my expression with a slight hiccup. "Dr. Jacobson!" she then exclaimed, laughing nervously to herself. That young man just stole my umbrella." I nodded without processing what she had said, although clearly, given this recollection, I did in fact remember it. My mind was still on the boy, you see. His eyes. His fangs. I think I said something absent-mindedly to her, like, "I'll be right with you, Elma," before meandering up to Seth and putting a hand on his shoulder. He shivered under my touch and turned to me, relieved. "What in God's name happened, Seth?" The young man shook his head, mouth open. I don't know. That little creepy kid just stormed through here and took that poor lady's umbrella. I mean, who the hell steals an umbrella, Doc? It's not even raining." Something about the intern's wording caught my attention. "Creepy little kid, Seth? What do you mean?" I agreed that little Robbie Beekman was most certainly creepy, but Seth hadn't been in the room with us to make that assessment for himself. In fact, before that morning, Robert Jr. was completely normal, an unthreatening child. "I mean, did you look at him, Doc? Really look at him? There was something funny in his eyes. Besides, the way he was standing at the door earlier, that was all, I don't know, creepy." "How was he standing at the door?" Seth looked at the entryway and then back at me. "All still and, I don't know, creepy, like I said." "He didn't step in?" The intern shook his head. "Not at first, no. I asked him if he had an appointment and he shook his head. Then I told him to come in and wait while I'd ask you to see him. That was it." "Come on in," I thought. Seth invited him in, just like in the movies. Thank you, Seth," I stuttered, and patted the boy on the shoulder before walking away. Where I was headed, I didn't know. "For what?" I heard him ask in confusion. I didn't answer. Really, I didn't have an answer to give. The rest of the day was more of the same. I guess you could call it coasting by. Not really thinking about much of anything aside from the boy and merely going through the motions of the job. I think I gave poor umbrella-less Elma Lutterman a crown instead of a root canal. Poor Elma Lutterman indeed. When we make it through this thing, Doris, if we make it through this thing, remind me to correct that mistake, would you? I did find her umbrella, you know. It's resting on the Beekman porch. Probably right where little Ronnie left it after his folks invited him into his own home. They were probably concerned as to why their own son, who surely had a house key, needed a warm welcome, and one during the middle of the school day, of all things. It was probably Karen, come to think of it. Robert Sr. would have been at the office. She probably pulled her boy inside, and rightfully so, feeling confused as I did one moment and the next feeling the child's teeth sink into her neck. Daisy would have been next. Then there'd be 3 of them, and even a man as capable and broad-shouldered as Robert Beekman wouldn't be able to ward off 3. 3 of them, Doris. 3 of them right here in our community. They were probably watching me as I drove by, plotting their next move. God knows there's probably more of them. Probably in that empty house. That's why I decided last night, being unable to sleep despite the garlic cloves and my mother's crucifix I had brought into bed with me, that morning I'd come to pay a visit to the old Schroeder house. And yes, I'd of course bring garlics and a crucifix along with me. You might think I'm crazy, Doris, but I'm certainly not stupid. Which leads me to the police. Why haven't I called them myself? After all, if I'm as sensible as I claim to be, wouldn't the most sensible thing to do, given this wild situation, be to call the authorities? And tell them what, exactly? What I'd have told the Beekmans? That their son may now very well be a creature of the night on account of some bargain bin plastic fangs? "Oh, yes, hello, officer. I'd like for you to drive a stake through a 6th grader's chest, if you'd please. I believe he's a threat to the public health." Even if I told them the truth without all the spooks, that there may very well be squatters camping out in the old Schroeder residence, you more than anyone, given your history as a paralegal, would recognize that the red tape such an endeavor would string up would take so long to cut through that by the time it was all snipped, half the city would already be bloodsuckers. Besides, If my research is correct, which was rather unorthodox to conduct in my profession, there not being any empirical articles written on vampirism after all, any and all vampires ought to be at rest during the daylight hours on soil from their native home or native grave. Superstition is confounding if not vague, ultimately meaning that it should be perfectly safe for me to venture onto the Schroeder property so long as the sun's overhead. I may not even need the garlic or crucifix at all. Perhaps I'll only need a stake. In my search for the truth, which mostly comprised of sifting through cheap tabloid articles, not surprising given the subject matter, I also attempted to determine whether or not anything like this has happened before, perhaps in another town not unlike our own. As you'd expect, there wasn't much in terms of supernaturally charged plastic teeth, which themselves are quite unremarkable, I might add, seeing as I picked them up off the ground out of a puddle of saliva and examined them closely. I found 3 articles about 3 separate accounts of children choking on their respective sets, but I could hardly see anything otherworldly about these accounts. There was, though, a young man who back in the late 80s found a pair of X-ray goggles in his pillowcase, and then proceeded to swear that there were skeletons walking down the street hours later, despite having only worn the glasses for 20 minutes. This was, of course, a story from the page of Downtown Tattletale, and as such, should also be taken with a grain of salt. Similarly, there are countless so-called eyewitness testimonies surrounding deadly Halloween candies, not filled with glass or razor blades, but rather a sort of supernatural paranormal power. But I digress. Given the task set before me, perhaps these many words of mine, scribbled on these pages, were but a way for me to delay the inevitable. Now I can delay it no more. If you've reached the end of this memo without disregarding it entirely, Doris, then I thank you. My long hand truly is as much, I suppose. Do know that right after my consideration of calling the police, I considered calling you. However, it was a dead of night at the time, and I didn't wish to disturb you. I suppose by now I regrettably have, though, haven't I? Give Jane and Vincent my love, would you? Yours truly, Dan. Hey everybody, Kevin here from Nightmares Nightly. If you made it this far, I want to thank you for listening. I also have a little bit of a thing I'd like to share with y'all. So, I don't know exactly what's even going on, but the channel has just, tumbled in the past month and a half. Going from, 3,000 to 8,000 views per video to, 1,500 views a video. I tried uploading a little more this month, a little more than often, but I've had to go back to work, working, 40, 50 hours a week, and also putting 20, 25 hours a week into the channel. The discoverability has just completely plummeted for some reason. So if y'all could just do me a favor, leave a like on the video, give me a comment, it helps boost in the algorithm, hit that notification bell, and please, one of the best ways for a channel to grow is word of mouth. So if you like creepypastas, horror stories, anything on this channel, if you have someone that likes that stuff, send them what you think they'd be interested in on the channel. Find a video that you think they'd like, and send that to them and tell them to give it a listen. I would more than appreciate it. And as always, thanks for listening, everybody.